You guys, I'm so excited. This is our final episode of the Myth of Three Golden Apples. And oh my gosh, um, I've loved reading this to you, but we better get on with it, huh? So we're at the part where our hero, Hercules, is asking Atlas, who's got the whole world, the whole sky on his shoulders, holding it up, how to get to the Garden of the Hesperides. So back to the last couple of lines of that of the third episode is when Atlas is saying, "I am Atlas, the giant, mightiest giant in the whole world, and I hold the sky upon my head." "So I see," answered Hercules, "but can you show me the way to the Garden of the Hesperides?" "What do you want there?" asked the giant. "I want 3 of the golden apples," shouted Hercules, "for my cousin the king." "There is nobody but myself," quoth the giant, "can go to the Garden of the Hesperides and gather the golden apples. If it were not for this business of holding up the sky, I would make 6 steps across the sea and get them for you." "You are very kind," replied Hercules. "And cannot you rest the sky upon a mountain?" "None of them are quite high enough," said Atlas, shaking his head. "But if you were to take your stand on the summit of that nearest one, your head would be pretty nearly on a level with mine. You seem to be a fellow of some strength. What if you should take my burden on your shoulders while I do your errand for you?" Hercules, as you must be careful to remember, was a remarkably strong man and thought it certainly requires a great deal of muscular power to uphold the sky. Yet, if any mortal could be supposed capable of such an exploit, he was the one. Nevertheless, it seemed so difficult an undertaking that for the first time in his life he hesitated. "Is the sky very heavy?" he inquired. "Why, not particularly so at first," answered the giant, shrugging his shoulders, "but it gets to be a little burdensome after 1,000 years." "And how long a time," asked the hero, "will it take you to get the golden apples?" "Oh, that will be done in a few moments," cried Atlas. "I shall take 10 or 15 miles at a stride and be at the garden and back again before your shoulders begin to ache." "Well, then," answered Hercules, "I will climb the mountain behind you there and relieve you of your burden." The truth is, Hercules had a kind heart of his own and considered that he should be doing the giant a favor by allowing him this opportunity for a ramble. And besides, he thought it would still be more for his own glory if he could boast of holding up the sky than merely to do so ordinary a thing as to conquer a dragon with 100 heads. Accordingly, without more words, the sky was shifted from the shoulders of Atlas and placed upon those of Hercules. When this was safely accomplished, the first thing that the giant did was to stretch himself. And you may imagine what a prodigious spectacle he was then. Then Lice slowly lifted one of his feet out of the forest that had grown up around it, then the other. Then all at once he began to caper and leap and dance for joy at his freedom, flinging himself nobody knows how high into the air and floundering down again with a shock that made the earth tremble. Then he laughed with a thunderous roar that was echoed from the mountains far and near, as if they and the giant had been so many rejoicing brothers. When his joy had a little subsided, he stepped into the sea, 10 miles at the first stride, which brought him mid-leg deep, and then 10 miles at the second, when the water came just above his knees, and then 10 miles more at the third, by which he was immersed nearly to his waist. This was the greatest depth of the sea. Hercules watched the giant as he still went onward, for it was really a wonderful sight, this immense human form more than 30 miles off, half hidden in the ocean, but with his upper half as tall and misty and blue as a distant mountain. At last the gigantic shape faded entirely out of view. And now Hercules began to consider what he should do in case Atlas should be drowned in the sea, or if he were to be stung to death by the dragon with 100 heads, which guarded the golden apples of the Hesperides. If any such misfortune were to happen, how could he ever rid of the sky? And by the by, its weight began already to be a little irksome on his head and shoulders. I really pity the poor giant, thought Hercules. If it wearies me so much in 10 minutes, how it must have wearied him in 1,000 years. Oh, my sweet little people, you have no idea what a weight there was in that same blue sky, which looked so soft and aerial above our heads. And there, too, was the bluster of the wind and the chill and watery clouds and the blazing sun, all taking their turns to make Hercules uncomfortable. He began to be afraid that the giant would never come back. He gazed wistfully at the world beneath him and acknowledged to himself that it was a far happier kind of life to be a shepherd at the foot of a mountain than to stand on its dizzy summit and bear up the firmament with his might and main. For, of course, as you will easily understand, Hercules had an immense responsibility on his mind as well as a weight on his head and shoulders. Why, if he didn't stand perfectly still and keep the sky immovable, the sun would perhaps be put ajar. Or after nightfall, a great many of the stars might be loosened from their places and shower down like fiery rain upon the people's heads. And how ashamed would the hero be if, owing to his unsteadiness beneath its weight, the sky should crack and show a great fissure quite across it. I know not how long it was before, to his unspeakable joy, he beheld the huge shape of the giant like a cloud on the far-off edge of the sea. At his nearer approach, Atlas held up his hands, in which Hercules could perceive 3 magnificent golden apples as big as pumpkins, all hanging from one branch. "I am glad to see you again," shouted Hercules when the giant was within hearing. "So you have got the golden apples." "Certainly, certainly," answered Atlas, "and very fair apples they are. I took the finest that grew on the tree, I assure you. It is a beautiful spot, that garden of Hesperides. Yes, and the dragon with 100 heads is a sight worth any man seeing. After all, you had better have gone for yourself." "No matter," replied Hercules. "You have had a pleasant ramble and have done the business as well as I could. I heartily thank you for your trouble. And now, as I have a long way to go and am rather in haste, and as the king, my cousin, is anxious to receive the golden apples, will you be kind enough to take the sky off of my shoulders again?" "Why, as to that," said the giant, chucking the golden apples into the air 20 miles high or thereabouts and catching them as they came down. "As to that, my good friend, consider you a little unreasonable. Cannot I carry the golden apples to the king, your cousin, much quicker than you could? As his majesty is in such a hurry to get them, I promise you to take my longest strides. And besides, I have no fancy for burdening myself with the sky just now." Here Hercules grew impatient and gave a great shrug of his shoulders. It being now twilight, you might have seen 2 or 3 stars tumble out of their places. Everybody on earth looked upward in a fright, thinking that the sky might be going to fall next. "Oh, that will never do," cried giant Atlas with a great roar of laughter. "I have not let fall so many stars within the last 5 centuries. By the time you have stood there as long as I did, you will begin to learn patience." "What?" shouted Hercules very wrathfully. "Do you intend to make me bear this burden forever?" "We will see about that one of these days," answered the giant. "At all events, you ought not to complain if you have to bear it the next 100 years, or perhaps the next 1,000. I bore it a good while longer in spite of the backache." "Well, then, after 1,000 years, if I happen to feel in the mood, we may possibly shift about again. You are certainly a very strong man, and can never have a better opportunity to prove it. Posterity will talk of you, I warrant it." Pish! A fig for its talk, cried Hercules with another hitch of his shoulders. Just take the sky upon your head one instant, will you? I want to make a cushion of my lion skin for the weight to rest upon. It really chafes me and will cause unnecessary inconvenience in so many centuries as I am to stand here. That's more than fair, and I'll do it, quoth the giant, for he had no unkind feelings toward Hercules and was merely acting with a too selfish consideration of his own ease. For just 5 minutes, then, I'll take back the sky. Only for 5 minutes, recollect. I have no idea of spending another 1,000 years as I spent the last. Variety's the spice of life, say I. Ah, the thick-witted old rogue of a giant. He threw down the golden apples and received back the sky from the head and shoulders of Hercules, upon his own, where it rightly belonged. And Hercules picked up the 3 golden apples that were as big or bigger than pumpkins and set straight away on his journey homeward without paying the slightest heed to the thundering tones of the giant, who bellowed after him to come back. Another forest sprang up around his feet and grew ancient there, and again might be seen oak trees of 6 or 7 centuries old that had waxed thus aged betwixt his enormous toes. And there stands the giant to this day, or at any rate, there stands a mountain as tall as he, and which bears his name. And when the thunder rumbles about its summit, we may imagine it to be the voice of giant Atlas, bellowing after Hercules. Come back! Come back, Hercules! The end. Thank you so much for listening to this wonderful myth with me. If you had even a bit of the enjoyment that I had, you will have had great joy. I loved our time together, and I'll see you next story. See you soon. Thanks so much. Wonder if Hercules is still... where is he nowadays? Don't know.